We're super lucky to have Graham today. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess to begin with, we just want to learn a little bit more about your background and some of the things that you've worked on thus far. Do you want to give us like a sort of a brief rundown? How'd you get interested in research in the first place? How have your interests sort of changed in the past few decades?
Yeah, so I got interested in research in my senior year of university, and I basically did a project for my machine learning class and really liked it. And my machine learning teacher was doing natural language processing, and that in combination with like me being interested in language led me towards language. And then I've been doing research for, I took a quick break between then and graduate school, but since graduate school, I've been doing research on kind of natural language processing, language models, multilingual natural language processing, and also for a long time code generation, which has evolved into agents. So
Hmm. Yeah, awesome. So I guess like let's look a little bit more into like some of your NLP research. So I mean, obviously the field has changed a lot recently in like the past like decade or so. I mean, like part of this has to do with like the GPT stuff as well, but I mean even before that, I assume like NLP has changed a lot in tandem. Like how like what would you say are like some of the trends that you've seen and like some of the shifts?
yeah, so I think the everything started changing about 10 years ago with the
Mm,
introduction of like neural network approaches and stuff like that. And
right.
I jumped on that pretty quickly because I could kind of see that it was way simpler than all the stuff we were doing before.
Mm-hmm.
With the idea being that, you can use relatively simple methods with sophisticated like optimization techniques and lots of data to make things work.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I immediately recognized how well that would work, and so I like continued doing somewhat more complex things. But now, obviously, we can see that you can get incredibly far by having just like a large neural network with a good inductive bias, and then
Right.
training forever. But I think it's kind of interesting that we kind of hit a wall with that, maybe 2 3 years ago, and now the big focus is on other things other than scaling, like data training, reasoning models, RL, and other stuff like that. So it's kind of a welcome change back to the like innovation and methods makes a big difference era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I guess jumping back to like 2001 and 2005. So I guess like you started at UIUC when you were studying CS. And then you ended up taking what I would say is a pretty interesting approach of going to Kyoto for your master's and PhD. So I guess like walk us through like I mean back when you were in the early days. This is basically like 2 decades ago. Like did you like how interested were you in NLP, and I guess like what made you want to go to Kyoto in the first place? Because I think like that's a pretty like, I actually haven't seen that often. I feel like you're the first person I've seen that's gone there. So yeah.
Yeah, it's not unheard of, but like so in my junior year, I studied abroad in Japan and I
Mm-hmm.
really liked it and I kind of wanted to go back. So I actually took a 2.5 year hiatus to work at a rural agricultural school in Japan as an English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a translator. And so by then I was like I knew I already was interested in computer science, and
Mm-hmm.
then I was very interested in language, specifically the Japanese language. And so I mostly went to Kyoto University because I wanted to do natural language processing, but also was interested in Japanese, and I knew I could do it, both of those there.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And I mean, I guess like now you're like I guess one of the things you're interested in is like multilingual translation. I think right. This is so. Some of this have to do with your time in Japan? I want to say, or
Yeah, for sure. It had to do with my time in Japan and then also coming back to the US and seeing just how many different, people speak different languages. People from India speak all kinds of different
yep,
languages. And
yep.
then we have, Africa. And like in a way, the diversity of the US makes it very easy to do that sort of research,
Mm-hmm.
like the diversity of US universities. So
Mm-hmm.
it's continued my interest in that field.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so I guess like you spent some time technically at NAR Institute of Science Technology. I guess you spent like 4 years there. And you spent another 4 years as an assistant professor at CMU, and I guess now you passed like the past 5 years or so as an associate professor. Like walk us through those three different experiences. So like one's being an assistant professor in Japan. I guess like contiguously we can call it like 9 years of being at CMU, something like that. How would you compare those two experiences?
Yeah, they're pretty different. When I was an assistant professor in Japan, I feel like we had a lot more kind of, I wouldn't say, I'd say people were in a way maybe a little bit more creative because there was less pressure to, deliver on a particular topic or follow the kind of hot thing that everybody was paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that may be a little bit of a difference between the US and Japan, where the US is very results driven, but I think it's also a little bit different with like, CMU being a school where everybody is trying to, stand out and
Mm-hmm.
do really impactful work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, both sides, like lots of creative, interesting research in Japan, and some of it, became highly impactful. And then in CMU, we're building the next generation of the most important technologies, but maybe in a little bit less of a varied way. So
Mm-hmm.
it's different in both of those respects.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha, makes sense. And I guess like in the past 9 years, I guess like you have like New Lab and you've done a lot of really interesting stuff there. Recently, you've worked on like AI agents for software development, with All Hands. So I guess like I guess one aspect of the podcast is like talking a little bit about the intersection of research and entrepreneurship. There are some professors at CMU that do entrepreneurship, not a ton. So I guess like I'm kind of curious like how you got interested in that, and like how'd you find the team for that? Like, walk us through your experiences, because I'm sure there's got to be something before All Hands too. Like, you must have experimented somehow, or was that your like first time going deep into something like that?
Yeah, so one thing I'll say first is that I've actually seen a lot more professors at CMU getting into entrepreneurship in the last 2 years, which has
Right.
been super exciting to see.
Yeah.
But my first entrepreneurship experience was actually in high school when I built a very essentially it was a clone of a popular text game, but I added a referral program where if
Mhm.
people joined it, they could, refer other people and get like points.
Mhm.
And it actually kind of took off. We got a million page views or something like that. But I,
Mhm.
as a high school student, needed to decide between scaling that and then going to college,
Mhm.
like doing my college applications.
Right.
And I eventually chose to do my college applications. And so then, for I had a long hiatus. And then in about 2022, we had a demo paper on a evaluation interface for large language models to kind of detect and prevent hallucinations.
Mhm.
And we just thought of it as a demo paper, but then a researcher that we really respect, who was also an entrepreneur, said, "Hey, have you considered making a company around this?" And
Mhm.
my answer was like, "No, but maybe we should." And
Mhm.
so then we did, and we created a company around it. But I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, so I made a lot of typical like entrepreneurship mistakes
Mhm.
that researchers make, and we ended up kind of losing interest in spending down the company because things were not going very well.
Mhm.
And then after that, about a year ago, we started like the open source project, Open Devon, after the release of Devon.
Mhm.
And so basically, we formed an open source community, and then people in the open source community were like, I want to work on this full time. And so we spun it off into a company, and the name changed to Open Hands, and the company is All Hands AI.
Mhm. Got it. Okay, so I guess like walk us through a little bit about All Hands. So I mean, you've talked about like Devon and Open Devon, and I guess like for people in the audience who aren't super familiar, Devon is well, there's a lot of things. So there's a company called Cognition that basically built Devon, which is like this AI powered software engineer. The idea is you can like basically tag Devon in like Slack or whatever, and it'll be able to like generate PRs for you. I guess All Hands and like Open Devon was basically an open source approach to that. I'm actually just kind of curious about this generally speaking, like all hands, like I guess on the website they say it's like open source agents for developers. You can try it live, get it on GitHub. If it is open sourced, like where exactly is like the revenue model behind like a for-profit business? Is this like a freemium type of structure? Like, want to walk us through how you like dealt with like the open source versus paid versions?
Yeah, so I can talk about the philosophy of the project and
Sure.
company first, which is that when the Devon demo came out,
Yeah.
a lot of people looked at that and they were like, "Oh, wow, this is amazing. This, could be the future of software engineering." And
Right.
I think at that time it wasn't yet, but I think now maybe it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like the technology has gotten there. And so we kind of formed around the idea that like if this is the future of software engineers should be able to participate in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we're building this open source.
Mm-hmm.
terms of how that works, we have a pretty big community of people. I would say maybe half of the active contributors are employees at the company, half are not. And
Mm-hmm.
then we have a bunch of people who like pop in to do a fix or something like that and pop
Mm-hmm.
out. Um, and the revenue model is we have two things. First, like we always aim to have the version that you can download and run on your own computer be
Mm-hmm.
like the top-notch agent. We're not like holding anything back, accuracy wise
Mm-hmm.
in terms of that. So you can get a good experience when you download it and run it.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have a hosted version, which is nice for convenience because you can do things like spin up like 5 agents at once and they all run, on different cloud sandboxes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or tag it in GitHub, GitLab, Slack, all of those places and get it to solve issues for you. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then people pay a little bit of a premium over what we're paying to the language model provider for when
Mm-hmm.
they use that. So they just pay a little bit more for tokens, and that goes to supporting our infra and a little bit for profit and supporting the people working at the company.
Mm-hmm.
And then separately from that, we get a lot of interest from people in like kind of security sensitive companies
Right.
because the first thing they do is like they download open source, they try it out and they like it, and
Mm-hmm.
then they want to deploy it to the larger teams. So we also have a solution to, deploy to the larger teams within these companies
Mm-hmm.
on premise. And for that, that's enterprise feature. So it costs a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, in summary, basically, you're B2C and B2B. Like, you're selling to
Mhm.
both businesses and customers. Cool. Um, okay, so I guess, like, how big is the team now? How have you guys scaled over time? How long has this stuff been going on for?
Yep. So we are a team of, so we have 3 founders,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we have 9 employees now.
Okay.
And so the total team size of kind of like full-time employees and founders is 12.
Mm-hmm.
And we have scaled gradually over time.
Okay.
We're not scaling up very quickly because we want to be very strategic in the people we hire. We want to
Of
work,
course.
efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Unlike some of the other people in the space, we haven't raised like a huge amount of money
Mm-hmm.
because we want to run slim, make sure that we can stay, like true to our open source roots and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
usually we scale up and hire somebody when we have like a burning problem that cannot be filled otherwise. So
Right.
that's generally been our strategy. And like another interesting thing is, because we're using agents, we can ship way faster than we would be able to
Right.
normally. And so we can do a lot more with a smaller team.
Yes, of course. Using agents to ship software that helps people build using agents. Um, Very cool. Okay, cool. So I guess like remember earlier you were talking about like I mean obviously you had that entrepreneurial stint in high school, but you also talked about how your first time you ran into a bunch of mistakes. And you said that there were like some problems that you had run into that a lot of researchers generally run into when they're doing entrepreneurship. So I guess like like I feel like research and obviously recently, and I think a lot of this is thanks to ChatGPT, honestly, there's been and like the word agents pretty much, there's been a large sort of collision between research and entrepreneurship that started to occur, I want to say around 5 years ago. Obviously like the whole NLP field was supercharged like 10 years ago, but in terms of like actually seeing like a large amount of like intersection between industry and research, I think that's happened around in like the past 5 years. So, I mean, naturally, there's like this huge influx of researchers that are interested in building companies or want to maybe productionize some of the things that they're doing. Like, what are some of the roadblocks that you feel like these researchers run into? And what do you think you've learned from some of them?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing I can talk about the two things that I personally ran into, and I think
Sure.
they're very common things.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing is that when you're doing research, the timescale is very different than the timescale for building a startup, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Especially a kind of startup that's looking to actually, acquire users as opposed to like a big tech startup. Sorry, a deep tech startup, where a
Mm-hmm.
deep tech startup builds up some like unassailable technical advantage and then goes in and uses that to disrupt the market or something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
for us, we kind of had an idea what we wanted to do and what we thought would be useful, and we built it for like 3, 4 months, and
Mm-hmm.
then it turned out it was not something that anybody wanted to pay for,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. And it also turned out that we were building the thing that we weren't like the best people in the world to be building. So
Mm-hmm.
we had like some sort of user interface element, and we weren't like the best
Mm-hmm.
front end developers in the world. So
Mm-hmm.
um, we were best in the world at some other things. So then we pivoted to doing those other things. But then, like, and specifically, those other things were things like hallucination detection of chat outputs. But there we hadn't properly validated that this was something the market needed then.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were selling that right after ChatGPT came out.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, it was great timing. We were very ahead of the market, but we were
Mm-hmm.
too far ahead of the market. Our timing was like too soon because people were just like scrambling to see how they could deploy LLMs at all, as opposed to really caring about like hallucinations, messing things up. So I think it was mostly everything boiled down to a lack of like talking to customers beforehand and getting their feedback and also like listening to their feedback. And I think I've learned a lot about how to like understand what people really need
Mm-hmm.
since then, and I'm doing better at that now. Another thing is I think I just didn't commit enough time to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like the CEO of the company, but I was also trying to juggle like
Yeah.
responsibilities at CMU, which I had a lot of, and that just doesn't work being the CEO of the company. So this time
Mm-hmm.
at our company, I said I am not being CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not gonna be able to like handle that at the same time as dealing with the stuff I need to deal with at CMU.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, both of those totally make sense. Especially, I think the first point resonates a lot. I guess this is something that they're supposed to teach you in business school, but honestly, I just think it's the type of thing you learn doing something like if you're not solving a burning problem, like I mean, you're not really. I don't know. I mean, like ultimately a business succeeds to make money. So like in order to make money, you need to like sell to customers, which means customers need to want what you're paying for. And honestly, I think sometimes there's also this divide of like a lot of people enjoy research because they're building cool stuff, but just because something's cool doesn't necessarily mean people want it. And so I think that's like a hard reality that a lot of people face as well. So I think that all totally makes sense. So let's call it like October 2024. You gave a talk at Berkeley and Stanford, I want to say, on agents for software development. And there are a lot of really cool things you talked about in that lecture, but I think one of them was like safety, if I'm not mistaken. So like safety is pretty important because as we've talked about, like coding models, obviously they're great in the sense that they can help enable people that might be less technical, but they might also make a lot of mistakes. And you talked a little bit about some like safety mitigations, like sandboxing and credentialing and post hoc auditing, some things like that. So, like how would you say that your approach to safety maybe differs from some of the others? And I guess this is sort of like a two-part question. Like, I guess one is like safety is obviously a really important consideration. Like, what do you think are some of the other like high-level considerations that you've taken into when you were building All Hands AI? And then the second is like, how would you say All Hands AI like differs from like Devin or maybe some of the other like coding agents? I believe like Codex came out recently from OpenAI, and so there's a lot of things going on. Like, what would you say are like some of like the key advantages?
Yeah. So maybe I can take the safety question first.
Sure.
So our biggest mitigation for safety is unlike a lot of the other agents, which are meant to be running on your computer
Mm-hmm.
against your files, like Cursor or Windsurf or
Right.
things like this, we've taken an almost entirely like cloud first approach where
Mm-hmm.
instead of interacting with your file system,
Mm-hmm.
it's interacting with like pulling from GitHub, doing modifying the code on GitHub and then pushing it back to GitHub as a pull request.
Right.
And so basically every time we're starting from like a new environment.
Mm-hmm.
So if it messes something up, you just throw away the environment and start
Yeah.
over. And so this is also something you can kind of like uniquely do with coding agents.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot harder to do with like other agents, like web browsing agents, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
But we found that to be pretty successful, and we haven't had a whole lot of complaints that like the agent accidentally messed up this thing.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a lot of guardrails and prompts, at
Mm-hmm.
least. So it's like do not push to the main branch with not in all, all caps and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So luckily, I mean, we mostly use Claude, and Claude is pretty well aligned to like do good things and not do bad things.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it relatively easy to get by with those sorts of mitigations, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in terms of differentiation, so there's a number of things. The first thing is we take a very benchmark heavy approach.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are constantly benchmarking on, For example, SWE-bench is the most obvious one, and we have a good score there.
Mm-hmm.
But also, we're branching out to other benchmarks, and we're actually hopefully going to announce something about that, very soon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I feel like this has been a good approach for us in for two reasons. The first reason is because we have a relatively small team, but this focus on benchmarking has made sure that our agent quality stays high and doesn't regress when we introduce something new and other things like that.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is we collaborate a very large amount with academia.
Mm-hmm.
And so, by having these open benchmarks, we maintain our spot on the top of the leaderboard. And because of that, all the people in academia like build around us, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. And so we constantly have like input from the open source community, and so we've been able to efficiently keep up with a very good, you know, keep up very good agent quality. So I'd say quality is a big differentiating factor.
Mm-hmm.
Another differentiating factor from most other coding agents, maybe Devin is in the same category, is we're trying to live where developers live. So we live in GitHub, we live in GitLab, we live in Slack,
Mm-hmm.
other things like this. So our idea is not, and when I say developers, I mean more like development teams. Our
Mm-hmm.
goal is not to live in an IDE; it's to live in the place where you're doing project management and all these other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, people may drop into the IDE to do really deep work and fix, like the most pressing issue of the day, but then the agents will go and, fix all the other stuff that's, relatively straightforward and needs to be done, like version upgrades or localization or,
Mm-hmm.
small bug fixes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say kind of quality wise and strategy wise, those are the two biggest things. And then, of course, we're open source, which means that anybody can download and use it, at least on their own computers. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very easy to test out in environments where you don't want to like leak all your data to some other place or something like that.
Mm, yeah, no, that all totally makes sense. All right, so we're getting close to time, so I guess we can wrap it up with two questions. So the first question is like more about multimodal stuff. So I know you've done a lot of we I guess we didn't really touch upon this too. I mean, I feel like it's sort of implied with like working on web-based coding agents that there's some amount of multimodality. But maybe like one of my favorite papers that you wrote is on Web Arena. You want to like talk very briefly about that, just for people that don't have context on that, both on like Visual Web Arena and Web Arena, like sort of like what was the goal of that, why is it important, maybe how it relates a little bit to All Hands.
Yeah, so Web Arena was actually my intro to agents. So before going into like coding agents, I was actually working on web agents.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, the reason why we did this was because at the time I was looking for kind of a realistic but a hard environment that we could benchmark. But anyway, what Web Arena is we basically set up a fake internet where it has like eight or so sites, all of
Mm-hmm.
which are implemented with open source software and populated with fake data or like possibly real data from appropriately licensed sources and stuff like this. So there's like a shopping site, a content management site, a map site, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And then agents are given tasks that they need to finish on the sites, and then each task has a validator to check whether that was correct or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then the agents will go and click through, and you see how well they did on all of those tasks.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, cool. Totally makes sense. All right, so last question. So a lot of the people that are, listening to the podcast are probably going to be engineers and researchers, either those that are, like maybe in the early or mid-career, that are, considering maybe building a startup, or people that are grad students, PhDs, master's students. Honestly, could even be some like really exceptional undergrads that care a lot about research or engineering. I guess like what are three tips that you might give them like at this point in time? I guess like we've already talked about some of the mistakes that you've made, but like imagine you're back at UIUC, back in the cornfields of Illinois, but now it's like 2025 and there's all of this like ChatGPT stuff going on. How would you think through, research or entrepreneurship today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think like one thing about startups is like I really am excited to see startups where you have like a unique insight or unique advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And so there have been a few startups at CMU where I'm like, oh, this person is kind of like uniquely qualified to make a really big splash in this space.
Right.
Um, if you have that sort of thing, like you have a unique experience and a unique insight, like you worked at another job and like there was something that really sucked about that job and you want to like fix it.
Mm-hmm.
That might be something that you can latch onto as an idea. Um, if you don't really have that, have something like that, but you have like lots of hustle, you could definitely try, but it's a lot harder to come up with differentiation. And like, I like Paul Graham's essay on like how to build a successful startup, which is
Mm-hmm.
like go to a company, observe them for 3 months and see what they're doing over and over and over again that they don't want to be doing, and
Mm-hmm.
build something there. So like if you don't have that insight, you might want to go to a place where you have the ability to build that insight. And
Mm-hmm.
that might be working at a company for a little while,
Mm-hmm.
or another alternative might be like going to grad school and doing a PhD and developing a really strong tech stack in a practical area.
Mm-hmm.
And then like during your PhD, that gives you a lot of time to think without, burning money. Like
Mm-hmm.
you get a stipend and other stuff like this. So that could give you a deeper insight. But yeah, I don't know if that's three things,
Mm-hmm.
but like
Yeah.
developing a unique idea is probably the hardest part from my point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. Yeah, if you don't have a unique idea, it's kind of difficult to like, I don't know, like have a moat. Okay, like yeah, like the business term for this is moat basically, which I think it's kind of unfortunate people don't really hear about these terms until they like do their own research. I feel like it would be useful to teach them some of this stuff, but it's not super hard to learn. But yeah, just basically having some differentiation is always super important, and I think that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. All right, cool. Well, thank you for your time, Graham. I think this was like super useful. And yeah, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.